Good day, everybody. I want to talk about the upcoming war with China and how it relates, as well as Ukraine's lack of ammunition and the Western military-industrial complex lack of ammunition, and how it relates to China. We might as well touch upon the reoccurring rumors of human rights violations in Xinjiang. But in my last video, I spoke about the projection of Western Russian experts, as well as Ukraine, claiming that Russia is running out of ammunition when it comes to artillery or ballistic missiles, that they're begging the Iranians and the North Koreans. And we've heard these things before. The fact is that these guys are projecting their own problems on Russia. And even Western media outlets is saying this. There's an article here by the Telegraph. It's behind a paywall though. It says that Vladimir Putin is about to win the ammunition war against the West. NATO has little time to ramp up production before Moscow resolves the remaining inertia of its manufacturing base. And here's another article by the Telegraph. It says Ukraine using more munitions than West can supply. There are several key factors for this, because Western military-industrial complex is privatized for the most part. It is profit-driven and not need-driven. It's not purpose-driven, so to speak, unlike the majority of the Russian military-industrial complex, which has a purpose-driven manufacturing base. And the military-industrial complex in the West has been designed to produce weapons for insurgency wars, mainly in like the Middle East or Africa, where they aren't fighting conventional armies. And when Russia talked about demilitarization, they are actually indirectly demilitarizing NATO as we're speaking. There's a lot of projection, not projection, but what do you call it? Speculation that China and the United States is going to war either in 2025 or 2027. My thing is this. The Americans have a huge problem with, first of all, they have a problem with, what do you call it, production of artillery pieces and other types of ammunition, because they have used it all, not all of course, but a lot of it in Ukraine. And we will go through that in some of these articles. So yeah, that's the big problem here. But we can read through the Telegraph article. It says here, Ukraine is expanding more ammunition than Western governments can supply it. NATO's top official has said, as he warned, the alliance is in an arms race against Russia. The NATO Secretary General said on Monday Russia had already started its long-expected offensive in eastern Ukraine, as the Kremlin hopes to seize the initiative ahead of the first anniversary of the full-scale invasion. Well, there's the thing, like, I don't think Russia really cares about the semantics of the whole thing in terms of like, it has to be on the anniversary of the full-scale invasion. Right, the Russians don't operate from a timetable, at least not the one we know of. They probably have one on their own, they're not disclosing it. I remember when, I think it was the 9th of May or something like that, when they were celebrating the victory, the Great Patriotic War and victory against the Third Reich when they invaded the Soviet Union. A lot of Western, quote-unquote, experts were speculating that Russia was going to declare open war against Ukraine. But President Vladimir Putin never did this. But anyway, I think that the reality is that we have seen the start already, sending thousands and thousands of more troops, Mr. Stoltenberg told reporters at the alliance's headquarters in Brussels. It is clear that we are in the race of logistics. Key capabilities like ammunition must reach Ukraine before Russia can seize the initiative on the battlefield. A war of attrition becomes a battle of logistics, he added. Yes, we have a challenge. Yes, we have a problem, but we have a strategy to tackle that. Ukrainian forces are estimated to be firing around 6,000 artillery rounds every day compared to the 20,000 fired by Russia. Mr. Stoltenberg warned that the current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production. Exactly. This puts our defense industries under strain. When Ukraine's defense minister Oleksiy Reznikov meets his NATO counterparts on Tuesday, he will demand they significantly step up donations of artillery shells to bolster Kiev's forces' defenses. But waiting times for some large caliber ammunition have increased to 28 months from 12 months, Mr. Stoltenberg said. We're not just sitting there idle and doing nothing. The industry has the capability to increase production in the short term, he added. You can have more shifts, you can work weekends. We need to ramp up production, invest in our production capacity. Western officials have repeatedly warned the outcome of the war in Ukraine would rely on West's ability to supply Ukraine with enough ammunition. Julianne Smith, the U.S. ambassador to NATO, said allies need to move things as fast as possible into their hands as they defend their territory. The U.S. is not willing to send like long-distance drones or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, because they don't want an open conflict with Russia. But yeah, that is the state of the military in MIC, military industrial complex of the United States and the West. Europe is even more messed up. Here is another article, and this is, let's see, yeah, 15th of February 2023 by lb.ua. And these are all like Western and pro-Ukrainian media outlets, by the way. It says here, U.S. teaches Ukrainian military to use less ammunition, according to Politico. In fact, I have a Politico article here as well that talks about these things. But I can go through this article because it's pretty short. It's not that long. Before I go, I need to see. Yeah, that's from Politico. The United States is seeking to train the Ukrainian military to rely more on maneuvers rather than artillery fire in combat, Politico reports. The reason for this is the growing concern about the ability of Western countries to replenish the Ukrainian armed forces' ammunition stocks. The article states that the war in Ukraine has been marked by the massive use of artillery by both sides. In Brussels, the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said that Washington and other countries are concerned about the ammunition shortage. We are working with the Ukrainian soldiers in various places throughout Europe to emphasize additional training on maneuver so that as they place more emphasis on maneuver and shaping the battlefield with fires and then maneuvering, there is a good chance that they'll require less artillery and munitions, the Pentagon chief said. France and Australia have agreed to cooperate to produce more 155mm ammunition. Last year, the United States also tried to increase its own production of 155mm shells. The U.S. Army has promised to triple its shell production from pre-war 14,000 to 90,000 per month by 2025. There you go. And let's see here, the Pentagon, and this is from Politico again. directly from Politico. It's not a republished article, but see, Pentagon scrambles to replenish weapon stocks to send to Ukraine. Lawmakers want U.S. to make more missiles, but companies will wait until they have contracts before cranking up production. And this was actually from last year. So already last year, the United States had issues with this. The Pentagon is rushing to replace thousands of U.S.-made Javelin and Stinger missiles pulled from European and American stockpiles for use in Ukraine. But the multi-billion-dollar effort is still waiting on the military and defense industry to figure out how to ramp up production quickly. Congress has declared it's all in on the restocking effort, forking over $3 to $5 billion to the Pentagon this month alone as part of $1.5 trillion government spending package. What's still unclear is how and when the Pentagon will spend the money. The exact number of Javelins and Stingers sent to Ukraine is difficult to estimate since most countries have been vague about their size of their contribution. But open source data indicates the US has sent about 1,400 Stingers and 4,600 Javelins. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia also pulled from their own stockpiles, including with 200 Stingers from the Netherlands and 500 from Germany. Several European countries have also sent thousands of their own shoulder-launched anti-air armor weapons to aid in the fight. There was an article by, I don't remember which media outlet, but it was a Western media outlet. They interviewed Wally, this legendary Canadian sniper that was serving in Afghanistan. And I think he used the Javelin or let's see here, or the Stinger, one of these two, right? It was the Javelin, I believe. And he said they either can't reach the Russian tanks, and even if they did reach, they couldn't really penetrate through their armor. As well as his unit of, I think it was only 4 men he had, were completely annihilated by Russian tanks. So a lot of these weapons aren't necessarily always, not to say that all of them are bad. I think you need like proper training, obviously, and so forth. But some of them are not capable of destroying Russian weaponry, tanks, for example. The Bradley was very effective in Iraq. In fact, it was infamous for destroying many Soviet-made / Russian-made tanks that the Iraqis were using. Obviously, a lot of the tanks that Russia used today have been updated. I still believe that the Bradley can do damage. I'm not saying that, but they're still up for a challenge. And I don't believe that these weapons will do much of a difference on the battlefield. First of all, because of the training period, and secondly, because there's just not enough of them. They don't have the production capacity at the moment to just pump out a bunch of tanks and airplanes, but Russia do. Russia is pumping out a lot of new tanks, armored vehicles, and so forth and so forth. So Russia has the advantage when it comes to the production capacity. So from another note to, let's see, there was I thought we could touch upon a subject that hasn't been spoken about in the Ukrainian conflict, and that is the involvement of ISIS. In fact, ISIS fighters have been reported to fight in Ukraine since pretty much like 2016, 15, I think. So this is nothing new. And the Russian government has come out with these allegations that there are ISIS fighters even today in Ukraine. Last year, Al-Mayadeen made a good report on this. And we're going to go through that article as well, but I want to go through a little bit more recent article. And this was released by the Ukrainian commander is shown with an ISIS patch. It says here the AP has published images of a supposed unit leader sporting terrorist insignia. The Associated Press, AP, has released a series of photographs as well as a video clip purportedly showing several Kiev fighters on the front line in the Donetsk region. One of the soldiers identified by the outlet as a Ukrainian unit commander by the name of Kurt and can be seen wearing an ISIS Islamic State insignia on his left arm. This isn't the first time Kiev's servicemen and paramilitaries have been caught on camera wearing extremist insignia, with many displayed sporting Nazi tattoos or patches. In fact, these have often been personally associated with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Earlier this week, he published several photos of Kiev soldiers on his Instagram account. One of the images featured a serviceman resting in a trench while wearing a Totenkopf, Death's Head skull patch, a symbol of the 3rd SS Tank Division, infamous for massacring civilians in France and the Eastern Front, including Polish Jews. In May, Zelensky also shared an image of a soldier with a similar skull head patch, but later deleted it. In October, he was photographed on a visit onto the front line while being surrounded by security guards wearing the same insignia. Kiev has denied the presence of any neo-Nazi element in the country's military, bluntly dismissing such assertions as Russian propaganda. Moscow, however, has repeatedly pointed to the fact that Kiev openly welcomed fighters with radical nationalistic and neo-Nazi views. One such example is the incorporation of the infamous Azov regiment, which to this day have, well, on the surface at least, denazified its unit when it comes to symbolism at least. In fact, they sent a delegation to Israel, and I believe this is all a bunch of PR bullshit stunts that they're doing. But anyway, one such example is the incorporation of the infamous Azov regiment, which openly uses the SS-affiliated Wolf's Angle rune as its official symbol, into Ukraine's National Guard. Russian President Vladimir Putin has maintained that denazification is one of the primary reasons Moscow ultimately decided to launch its military operation in Ukraine in late February 2022. Yes. I thought we could talk about the Al-Mayadeen article because Turkey actually supplied the Ukrainians with a lot of drones up until recently, right? Since they have gotten pissed off at the Americans for their nonsense. And they have helped, they've obviously supported a lot of radical elements in the Syrian opposition that fought against the Assad government. And these radical elements have spoken about going to Ukraine. I believe some of them have been in Ukraine fighting. And this shows the complexity between Russian and diplomatic relations, right? So this is an article from last year, almost a year ago, 8th of March, and it goes like this. Terrorists from Syria go to Ukraine to fight Russia. Will Turkey suffer? Russian-Turkish diplomatic relations are quite complex. While some collaboration exists in several sectors, competition is dominant in other sectors and domains, particularly the security sector. The Turks are in a bit of a stalemate when it comes to Idlib, because that's where a lot of their fighters are located at. They're proxies, so to speak. They don't want the Russians or specifically the Syrian Arab Army to clean out the place, because they are scared that over 3 million refugees are going to come over on the Turkish border, right, and destabilize the country. And one of the Turkish political experts here, I think it was from the Carnegie Institute, argued that one solution that the Turkish government is using is pretty much dumping these ISIS fighters in Ukraine. Whether they do this to this day, I have no idea. But they have done it in Libya. There's actually been video footage of ISIS fighters captured, right? And they used to fight in Syria with Turkish backing. And Turkey has been a supporter of the government in Tripoli, whilst Russia, I don't know if they did it directly, but the Wagner group fought on the side of the warlord, what's his name? General Khalifa, right? And as well as Khalifa also got backing by the Egyptians, the United Arab Emirates, and so forth. So, but anyway, that's a completely different conflict. However, these conflicts tend to intertwine with one another in one way or another, right? So, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky on February 27th urged foreign fighters to head to Ukrainian embassies worldwide in order to sign up to volunteer to fight Russia in Ukraine. Now, Zelensky says that 16,000 foreign volunteers have arrived in Ukraine to assist in their fight against Russia. These conflicts are also obviously linked to China. And I will go through the article regarding the Xinjiang provocation as well, and the US setting up a theater of war against China. So, the pro-Serb Democratic Front, the largest bloc in Montenegro's governing coalition, called on the authorities to prevent the recruitment of Montenegrin fighters for Ukraine's armed militia. Such a call from the Ukrainian embassy is an obvious attempt to destabilize our country, and the authorities must react. They must prevent Montenegrin citizens from fighting in foreign wars, as this is also prohibited by law, the Democratic Front said in a press release. According to ministry data, some 31 Montenegrin citizens have fought in foreign wars since 2012, with 26 having fought alongside ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The majority in Montenegro have strong sympathies for the fellow Orthodox Christian Russians who have been targeted by Nazi militias such as the Azov Battalion in the Donbass. Montenegro criminalized participation in foreign conflicts in March 2015. And those convicted face prison sentences of up to 10 years. Montenegro joined NATO in June 2017. Let's see. Radical Islamic terrorists in Idlib, Syria, are among those fighters seeking to reach Ukraine to fight the Russians. Radical Islam is a political ideology that has been called Islamo-fascist and shares commonalities with the Nazi militias in Ukraine. Both the Nazis in Ukraine and the terrorists in Idlib are fighting the Russians. The terrorists in Idlib have devised a plan to send fighters to Ukraine while also fighting the Russians in Idlib, thus hitting Russia on two battlefronts. Sohail Hamoud, a famed terrorist in Idlib, who is nicknamed Abu Tau for his skill in operating the American anti-tank missile BGM-71 Tau, recently offered assistance to Ukraine. Hamoud said on Twitter, "There is a strong will. I am in Idlib now and ready to go to support the Ukrainian army. I want to help someone." He is said to have more than 100 confirmed hits of Russian-made tanks in Syria during the battles against the Syrian Arab Army. Former President Obama had sent the Tau anti-tank missiles to Idlib. Iraqi terrorist leader Maysara bin Ali, also known by Abu Maria al-Qahtani, said on Telegram that if a Muslim in Ukraine fights and defeats the Russians, he would be rewarded in heaven, and if he gets killed, he would be a martyr, having died in a holy war. The most powerful terrorist force in Idlib is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, a coalition of Islamist groups made up of Syrian and foreign fighters, and dominated by Al-Qaeda affiliate known as Jabhat al-Nusra. The main problem is the foreign fighters. They have nowhere to go, said Sinan Ulgin, a former Turkish diplomat and analyst with Carnegie Europe, Sending the terrorists to Ukraine is one solution that the US and NATO are using, just as the Obama administration used the Al-Qaeda terrorists to fight the Syrian government for regime change. Those same terrorists can be utilized to fight the Russians in Ukraine and Idlib. The UN envoy to Syria has said there are around 10,000 HTS terrorists in Idlib. Other terrorists are fighting under the Free Syrian Arab Army banner. However, once President Erdogan of Turkey began sponsoring them, he changed their name to the National Front for Liberation. The US-NATO war on Syria for regime change used the Muslim Brotherhood partisans as boots on the ground in Syria. The terrorists were originally named Free Syrian Arab Army, but were taken over by Al-Qaeda and finally morphed into ISIS. Ankara considers the Kurdish militia in northeast Syria as terrorists, but supports the Al-Qaeda-linked terrorists in Idlib. Turkey invaded Syria in several places, and Idlib was one of their occupation points. The Turkish military convoys pass freely amidst the terrorists in Idlib. Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole article. It's pretty long, but it also discusses the complexity of Russian-Turkish relationship, and the fact that Turkey has bought defense systems, air defense systems, the S-400, and they have a lot of trade, but they compete in, for instance, in certain geopolitical aspects when it comes to security. However, nowadays, this is from a year ago, things have sort of changed. We have spoken about the rapprochement between Assad and Erdogan, with mediation, with the backing of Russians. How successful these have been haven't really been kind of disclosed yet, but if there were to be a sort of peace deal, then that would effectively bring an end to the Syrian conflict, more or less. Now, if we go back again to the China issue, it says here from Associated Press, how Ukraine war has shaped U.S. planning for a China conflict. And in this article, the United States military officials talk about how the United States have an ammunition shortage. A lot of it because of their incompetence in the Ukraine conflict. So we can read a little bit of it. I'm not going to read all of it. It's a pretty long article. But yeah, we can read from this part. Stockpile woes. But the Pentagon can't pre-position equipment it doesn't have. Ukraine is putting intense pressure on the US and European defense stockpiles and exposing that neither was ready for a major conventional conflict, as I spoke about. For some items, we have weaknesses in both our inventory and our production capacity, said CSIS International Security Program Senior Advisor Mark Kanassian, an author of the Taiwan Report. In a couple of places, particularly artillery ammunition, it could become a crisis, he said. Ukraine is shooting as many as 7,000 rounds a day to defend itself and has depended on announcements about every 2 weeks of new ammunition shipments from the US. Since Russia invaded, the US has sent Ukraine millions of rounds of munitions, including small arms and artillery rounds, 8,500 Javelin anti-armor systems, 1,600 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, and 100,000 rounds of 125mm tank ammunition. One of the biggest stockpile pressure points has been 155mm howitzer ammunition. The US has sent Ukraine's 160 howitzers and more than 1 million howitzer rounds, which have been put to heavy use with as many as 3,000 rounds fired a day, according to the Pentagon. Yeah. Ukraine, hold on. Ukraine is waging a different type of war than the US would likely face with China, said Doug Bush, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition. A future US campaign would likely involve much more air power and sea power, taking some of the pressure off of land-based systems and ammunition. But allies would still need to be supported with land-based systems and ammunition. Rebuilding takes time. The Pentagon's defense strategy says US must be able to conduct one war while deterring another. But the supply chain has not reflected that. Hicks said that the surge of weapons to Ukraine has not slowed down US support to Taiwan. But many of the military sales promised to Taiwan are facing the same pressures as the Ukraine munition face, such as limited parts or workforce issues. In response, the US has set up a presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan, Hicks said, which will allow the US to send weapons from its own stockpiles instead of arranging new contracts. The Army is working with Congress to get the authority to do multi-year contracts so that firms will invest to meet longer-term needs, and especially for the systems Bush called the Big Four: Javelin missiles, high mobility artillery rocket system launchers, HIMARS, guided multiple launch rocket system, GMLRs, ammunitions, and 155 millimeter rounds. Without that urgency, we risk being behind at the wrong time later, Bush said. The Army is adding production lines for 155 military artillery, including major components such as the outer metal shell, chargers, the fuse, and the explosive material, while right now all production is at one facility in Iowa. All of that will take time. CSIS reported it could take 5 years or more to replenish 155 millimeter Javelin and Stinger stockpiles. The good news is that I think the Ukraine conflict has alerted people to these weaknesses. The bad news is that they're going to take a long time to solve, even if there is a lot of political will, said Hal Brands, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. For European stockpiles, there is not much excess left to send, and many of the partner nations are rushing to sign new contracts with industry to replenish inventories. However, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned this week in Brussels that particularly for larger caliber munitions, such as the ground artillery, it could be as long as 2.5 years before some new orders are delivered. Well, there you see, it's a big problem. Now, Western media or NGOs, because Amnesty International has fired or handed in a report again, or published a new report regarding China's mistreatment of ethnic and religious minorities, in particular the Uyghur population. We've spoken about this before, briefly, we've touched upon it. I think the Gray Zone, the guys at the Gray Zone, made an excellent investigation of the claims made by a man named Andrew Zenz. He is the one who pretty much started the whole thing. And his investigation was based upon 8 interviews. There was a lot of faulty statistics in it. And we also spoke about why Xinjiang is targeted. Xinjiang, first of all, is a very important industrial hub. It is one of the important areas for China's Belt and Road Initiative. This is where China built a lot of infrastructure through Xinjiang and then into, for example, Pakistan. Afghanistan had, there was also plans that Afghanistan was going to be part of the BRI, and that the road will eventually go via Iran, which will connect Afghanistan to the sea. But you also, that's why as well, the area Xinjiang has been a hotbed for pan-Turkist and Salafist propaganda. Since the 1990s, there has been a lot of terrorist attacks in the forms of bombings, as well as knife attacks by Uyghur extremists. In fact, a large portion or the majority of their victims have been other Uyghurs. And that's why the security level in this area is quite high. Now, there are some things that Western media is not talking about. For example, there has been, a lot like delegations from many Muslim countries in Xinjiang, and they have praised the Chinese for their anti-terror operations in Xinjiang, their anti-extremism approach. You also have to look at this. In Xinjiang, there is 29,000 mosques or 30,000 mosques built by the Chinese government. The Uyghur language is taught in schools. In fact, it's even on the currency in Xinjiang. Not even like Native Americans get this treatment in the United States, right? They're dying off on reservations from poverty and alcoholism. Yeah, but nobody talks about that, right? In the Western press, at least not in this mass expose. Then you have the fact that minorities, including the Uyghurs, they are actually given a what do you call it? Kind of like the what they have for Black Americans in the United States, where they are given an easier way to get into universities, I believe. Also, they are the Uyghur birth rate has actually been higher than that of the ethnic Han Chinese. So there is neither a cultural nor a physical genocide going on in China against the Uyghurs or any other ethnic minority. So this is pure nonsense. But anyway, I thought we could read a little bit from this article. It says here, Chinese human rights is set to top the news again. Let's talk about the Xinjiang victims database. And this is an article from RT by an American journalist and columnist called Bradley Blankenship. A list of co-conspirators in the alleged anti-Uyghur atrocities has been created, except there's no fact-checking involved. The UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights kicked off its 73rd session on February 13th and runs through March 3rd. NGOs are rushing to submit their reports and focus on the alleged issues of some countries. Leading the charge, Amnesty International has already submitted its report on China. The lengthy report levels numerous accusations against Beijing, which you can read for yourself. The beginning, however, points to a few topics that have already made their way through the media, including discrimination against ethnic and religious minorities, with references to political indoctrination and forced cultural assimilation of Muslims in Xinjiang. It also includes similar examples of religious repression in Tibet. Again, I have to go back again to the security, the heavy security that is in Xinjiang. Many Uyghurs have actually joined jihadist groups in Afghanistan, as well as in Syria and Iraq. I think like people from Northern Caucasus and Central Asia, as well as the Uyghurs, many ethnic Uyghurs, were some of the most violent fighters in these Islamist death squads, right? So, or so there is a fear, a justified fear, in my opinion, of destabilization by these militants if they would ever come back, and they do pose a threat, right? So, Tibet has long been a touchy subject, with Westerners proclaiming Free Tibet or rattling off some examples of repression in the region. This is far from the case. The Chinese government preserves the Tibetan language and culture and acts as an official mediator for the Buddhist faith when determining a living Buddha. This is an important function that actually keeps the faith alive and prosperous. With regard to Xinjiang, it is important to note that representatives from Muslim countries have visited the autonomous region and sang China's praises for its anti-terrorist activities. Every Muslim country backs Beijing in relevant votes on the matter before the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA. It's also important to note that China protects the Uyghur native language and teaches it in schools alongside Mandarin, with the latter taught to help increase economic opportunity in the country for those who don't already speak it. It is a far cry from cultural genocide, as some have called it, considering Uyghurs are not being exiled from their native Xinjiang. The charges, which have been dipped into that muddy territory of genocide, are also flimsy that even US State Department lawyers didn't think they would stick. Geopolitics is one of the better reasons why the Xinjiang issue has been so fiercely presented. So even US State Department lawyers didn't think that these accusations were valid. I'm telling you guys, this is just propaganda to prepare you and me and the masses here for the next coming war. And the United States, for now at least, they have been arming and training indirectly or directly with some of their allies, these Uyghur Islamist extremists, because they always support the most extreme people in every country that they're trying to target. Right now, they are militarizing Japan. We spoke about the Financial Times article where they interviewed General Justin Bierman, I think, or James Bierman, and as well as the Philippines. And they have obviously been sending weapons to Taiwan. But let's proceed. The US wants to kneecap China's solar panel and polysilicon industry, which is based primarily in the region. That's why the US banned these goods outright, much like how it attacked Huawei products recently, using national security concerns as the pretext. Washington is waging a high-tech war with Beijing. This is about destroying China's economy. That's it. They don't want a rival against Western hegemony. And I think there's an element of racism here. China is a non-white country. Its economy has pretty much out-earned Europe, and it will, by 2025, said to be supersede the US economy in terms of like production and consumption and so forth, right? But it makes sense. China has a larger population. They send more people into subjects such as technology and infrastructure and so forth, while we in the West, our birth rates are low. We tend to put more emphasis on, when it comes to academia, we tend to put emphasis on, for example, humaniora, right? And in my opinion, a lot of the humaniora is pretty useless. We see the so-called analysis they do of China or of Russia. It's pretty ignorant. It's kind of laughable. They always portray these countries as, especially Russia, is very backward and so forth. And they make it sound like a military conflict with China is going to be easy. Like, this is not your grandfather's China from the 1950s. They have a much more advanced military today. Russia has a much more advanced military. Uh, so, and a war with China would be even more devastating because China is the world's factory. They're the ones who are producing everything that we buy, basically. Now, and if we chop off that line, well, where are we going to get our stuff? Because in the West, we have outsourced all our industries to third world and second world countries. Among them was China in the beginning, right? When they opened up their economy. And one of the reasons why the Chinese economy, despite some of the economic liberal forms, did manage to sort of not go completely haywire with its capitalist economy, or parts of its capitalist economy, because it's not fully capitalist, it's not a neoliberal country. It's because they didn't financialize their economy. They did not allow the financial sector to pretty much run the economy, right? China has a strong industrial base. It has a strong central government. Russia has a strong central government. And the United States don't like countries with strong central governments. Let's just say it like that. And this central government usually gets the last say when it comes to how companies, both in the private sector, gets to act and do. That doesn't mean that mistakes don't happen. That doesn't mean faults don't happen. Obviously, they happen. I'm not saying that. But in general, they have way better control over their economy than, for instance, the neoliberal West. So let's continue. Perhaps the oddest thing to come from this propaganda blast is that someone have even created a dubious Xinjiang victims database, which includes a list of people who are allegedly connected to human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Apparently, at some point, the list includes famous Chinese actors Andy Lau and Chow Yan Fat, or at least their pictures. However, they cannot be seen on the page any longer, presumably after the database was called out by Chinese social media users. This list, they will go through it in the article, is suspected to be some sort of hit list. Now, what government is using a hit list again to silence their critics? Yeah, the Ukrainian army. In fact, the Ukrainian government, the SBU, and that whole apparatus, right? In fact, they have a 13-year-old girl from the Donbass on that hit list who's using mafia tactics here. But anyway, the list is run by Gene A. Bunin, a Russian-American who credits himself as a writer and translator who has been researching the Uyghur language in Xinjiang since 2008 and doesn't want to be described as an activist. He has bylines in foreign policy, and his interviews and comments have been featured in other US-sponsored media. Bunin was based in Almaty, Kazakhstan, before being denied entry into the country in 2021. His reporting, like nearly all Western Xinjiang investigators, doesn't come from the ground in China. The Xinjiang Victims Database claims to be almost entirely funded by donations. A few of the people in the database are not even Chinese and have no relevant connection to Xinjiang. The only reason they are on this list appears to be because they speak positively about China and happen to live there. The website's FAQ section notes that it doesn't fact-check all of its submissions, since this is too cost prohibitive given our resources and often impossible, given the information vacuum in Xinjiang. For the most part, Shahid.biz operates passively and imports data from a mix of public sources, such as video testimonies and media reports, and official documents reporting as accurately as possible and the information conveyed in the original source. It is outside our scope and ability to go out and corroborate each and every testimony. It says here, I spoke to some of the folks on the list, including Jerry Gray, a British Australian expat who has lived and worked in China for 18 years, and Daniel Dumbrill. He has an excellent channel, by the way. A Canadian who owns a brew pub in Shenzhen and has lived in China since 2008. And it goes like this. I have no idea what the purpose of this list is, other than to identify people that the list disagrees with. With what their purpose is a mystery. It could be just an academic exercise, or it could be more nefarious purposes to create some kind of hit list, Gray told me. One thing is clear. It serves no legal purpose, as no law has been broken on my part, and I am sure, but can't speak for others, that no law appears to have been broken. So I'm at loss as how to describe its real purpose. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I will end it there because this is a pretty long article. I will put every article in the description, obviously. If you want to read them, feel free to do so. But we are heading into more and more dangerous times. Please stay updated and be aware of what's going on. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.